Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel. My name is Maludi Grasha, and I am an NX Unite team member at Nexus Marketing and your moderator for today's panel. Today's panel topic is digital advertising strategies for nonprofits. And as usual, before I introduce today's panelists and we jump into this fascinating topic, I do have some quick logistics to cover. NX Unite by Nexus Marketing serves as a powerful community resource designed to foster connections and facilitate lasting relationships within the mission driven sector. On NX Unite, you can find upcoming industry events, suggested influencers to follow, trusted solutions, and cost driven podcasts. NX Unite also hosts webinars, demos, and of course, panels with experts such as these lovely folks with me here today. Today's sponsor is Getting Attention. They help nonprofits expand their impact and reach more people through Google Ads. Your nonprofit may be eligible for the Google Ad Grant, and Getting Attention can help you at any stage of the Google Ad Grant process. Thank you so much for supporting the NX Unite mission. All right, today's hour-long panel will include time both for questions curated by my team and questions from you all, our fantastic audience. So at any time during the panel, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll spend the second half of the panel addressing as many as we possibly can. Now, if you're having any technical difficulties or have any logistics questions, my team member Anton will be in the chat under the Team NX Unite username, ready to assist you the best he can. I also wanted to share that this panel is being recorded. So for those of you watching live, the recording will be sent to you via DM in the NX Unite community platform after we wrap up. People can continue to access the recording after the panel in the event recording library. Finally, before I introduce today's panelists, I want to thank you all for attending this panel. Whether you're attending live or watching the recording, we're very excited to be in touch with you, the mission-driven community. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today to learn from these outstanding experts who I will now finally introduce. I'd like to first introduce Beth Hatcher, who is the principal and CEO of Beth Interactive, a digital philanthropy and communications agency in Chicago. With 18 years of experience in online fundraising, healthcare marketing, and digital technologies, she specializes in crafting customized communication strategies for nonprofits both within and outside of the digital sphere. Beth, thanks for joining.
Thanks, Malu. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here with us this morning or afternoon.
All right. Also with us is Jessica King, who is the business lead at Getting Attention, where she helps nonprofits acquire and manage the Google Ad Grant to expand their impact. Prior to her work at Getting Attention, Jessica worked in nonprofit and higher education organizations, focusing on communication and digital marketing, and most recently in search engine optimization in the mission-driven sector. Jessica, thanks for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Looking forward to a good panel.
Also with us today is Shelly Hudson, who is the Vice President of Digital at Vera Data. She brings over 25 years of marketing experience with a focus on digital strategy and implementation. Throughout her career, she has collaborated with nonprofit organizations, adeptly acquiring, engaging, and retaining donors. Shelly, so glad you could join.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
And finally, with us is Stef Jones, who is the Senior Digital Strategist at Foresight Studios Interactive. She brings years of proven success in fundraising and digital marketing campaigns within the nonprofit sector. She is able to leverage her extensive experience in digital marketing and fundraising to drive growth and success for other nonprofits through creative and strategic solutions. Stef, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
All right, now it's finally time to hear from our panelists. And Jessica, I'll have you start us off with the first question. How important are digital channels for a nonprofit's overall marketing strategy?
Yeah, I'm sure everybody will probably say something very similar, but digital channels are very important for nonprofit marketing. So much of our world is digital today, and so much of the people who support your mission's attention is kind of captured in that digital realm. It's really important, especially as your nonprofit grows and becomes more established, because it takes a lot of work to get the word out about all the good initiatives that are being done all over the country and the world. So I think investing in digital channels is a really important priority.
Thanks, Jessica. All right, Beth, over to you. How crucial are digital channels to a nonprofit's overall marketing strategy?
I certainly agree with you, Jessica, on it. And I think one other thing to add is just how cost effective digital strategies are in the big scheme of things. We still have clients that do direct mail for fundraising, which still, of course, brings in a huge part of the fundraising revenue, even though my little digital heart can't handle it. But the fact that you not only have a more cost-effective method of communicating with donors and prospects, but also one that has such incredible analytic support that can come with it. Who's responding, what they're doing, what they're clicking on, especially in the email realm that our team primarily works in, and being able to have that information to leverage. What is that next step or that next action with a donor or a prospect? That's something that you really only can get in the digital sphere. So I agree with you, Jessica. I think more and more important, especially as we continue to grow in this extremely quickly changing world, I feel like being able to stand out in this digital space is absolutely crucial for nonprofits.
Thanks, Beth. All right, Shelley, over to you. How important are digital channels in a nonprofit's overall marketing strategy?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with the previous two ladies, but also add to that the real-time engagement opportunity. So you have, you can engage with supporters, allowing you to respond to inquiries, address concerns, foster meaningful interactions, which builds trust, strengthens relationships, and enhances that overall supporter experience. You could be running ads or doing posts on social media, and you automatically see right away what the problem is, and you can address them, and you can talk to them right away and, see what their problem is and kind of get back to them and let them know. I would also echo the cost effectiveness of digital channels. Because broadcast TV, traditional radio, billboards, direct mail is expensive, and digital, you could do a campaign for $500, you could do one for $500,000. It's very, very easy to dip your toe in and see what works before you expand.
Thanks, Shelley. All right, Steph, what would you like to add on the importance of digital channels in the overall strategy?
Yeah, what can I add? You guys all said everything. That is definitely on top of my list. It also is a low barrier. Again, that cost effectiveness, really, it's something that is so different from traditional marketing that you can start off really low and be able to build your spend. But it also brings an opportunity for emotional connection with your audience. You're able to really, if you can, depending on your nonprofit, put a face to what you're doing and really build that storytelling aspect in a really impactful way. And that, I think, is something that digital channels have really changed the scope of how we can interact with audiences. So I think that, on top of everything everyone else said, is really digital channels. There's no reason not to be utilizing them in every way, organic and paid.
Great point. Thanks, Steph. All right, we're off to a great start. And Shelley, I'll have you start us off with the next question. What are some emerging digital trends for nonprofit marketing that you think nonprofits should know about?
Well, emerging to one person is not emerging to everyone. So I've been working with nonprofits for like 15 years. And back then I was working with large organizations, and email was emerging, and websites was emerging, and Google search was emerging. But then today, sometimes we'll work with a new organization who hasn't done it before. So to them, all of that is emerging. So without getting people, overwhelmed with, too much emerging technologies like Bitcoin and influencers, I think sometimes it's good to take a step back and look at what you're doing, like the Google Grant or Bing search, but then also testing programmatic media channels, display, native, CTV, OTT, audio, games, digital out of home. There's programmatic is so great, where you can just target very finite audiences. You can upload CRMs into it. You can get third-party lists. Is really just sky's the limit. Using evergreen campaigns ongoing for retargeting and lead generation. Always testing out alternatives to cookie targeting, cookieless targeting with context AI, and uploading lists. AI, I know people can get overwhelmed, but you can, again, dip your toe in it in small spaces. A lot of our media channels are using it already. You can use it for your list development, for outbound targeting, and also with your content development. Like if you don't have a copywriter on staff, or you're not as adept at building content, it can help with that. That's just, kind of not super advanced, but then if you're really going for it, testing TikTok or Snapchat or working with influencers and micro influencers are all, I think, emerging things to some nonprofits that if you're not already doing it, would be a good idea to test it.
Wonderful. Thanks, Shelley. All right, Steph, over to you. What digital trends should nonprofits be aware of?
I think if not already doing this, a lot of personalization and testing personalization. I think especially with third-party cookies not being available, really taking a step back again and looking at your first-party data. And you have so much data that you're gathering just by getting that first-party data. How can you use that to personalize the interaction? Even by putting first name in your outreach, like email, or seeing what source they came from to then talk to them in a very specific way. I think personalization and that segmentation is really, I think, where nonprofits should be really honing into and how they're talking to their donors, because I think that's what donors really want to feel like the nonprofit they're donating to understand them. So I think that is where I would recommend.
Wonderful. Thanks, Steph. All right, Jessica, any trends we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think both Shelley and Steph kind of talked about the fact that AI is growing. I think we're really just scratching the surface of how that can be used. And so I think echoing what they have mentioned about experimenting with it, but making sure to keep a human eye to what is going on, because a lot of the stuff that AI produces is good, but can be a little bland. So you probably don't want to just copy and paste directly what comes out of the AI and send that out. That was one thought. The other things that I'm seeing more, and my kind of day-to-day work is more in the realm of search. So Google search primarily, this is kind of what I'm seeing more and more of. I'm seeing video responses being more and more popular. Seems like people are gravitating to videos for a lot of answers to search queries. And similarly, I'm seeing a lot more of what I would call like community-based replies. So those of you who are familiar with search may know that one of the most common like second searches that people will do is whatever they just said plus Reddit, because Reddit is a big forum where people can share their opinions, and it's a little less moderated than say Google, which has its own algorithms. I'm seeing those types of responses rewarded. I think video is a slightly easier one. If you've got an iPhone, you can begin kind of recording video, or if you have a smartphone, I should really say, you can begin recording video. So that's something that you could kind of dip your toes into. There's also lots of video editing software out there that is like free, so you can kind of polish it up, see how your audiences respond to that. I think that for community-based responses, that one might be a little bit more challenging, but if your nonprofit has a very active community, it could be interesting to kind of loop them in and begin working with them on that. So those are things that I've been noticing just kind of out in the wild more and more that I think might be interesting when applied to a nonprofit context.
I love that. Thanks, Jessica. All right, Beth, final thoughts on trends that we should be aware of.
So, well, these are some very smart ladies here sharing their feedback. I think, Steph, I was honing in as well on personalization and A/B testing in particular. And I think in the email marketing realm, I mean, let's just be honest, there's so much noise in the digital space, and it is becoming harder and harder to cut through it. And I think what we're seeing with our clients in the nonprofit space is what you did last year doesn't cut it. It has to be a little bit different, a little bit more innovative. And I think the personalization is really critical, but not just first name, but referencing previous giving history, last gift date, last gift amount, what are you supporting, and trying to hone and tailor that content to be as specific to your individual donor as possible. I mean, all of these digital techniques, and email in particular is a broad-based mechanism, but I think the emerging trend is the need to make it more and more personalized. And what's beautiful about digital and email is the ability to do that with dynamic messaging, dynamic content, and personalization. But to that end, we don't actually know what works until you test it and try it. And so I think that's the other piece that, A/B testing is always on our mind, but is it testing time of day, day of the week, a more emotional and heartfelt story versus something that's a little bit more cut and dry? Is it including personalized information or not? Is it different images? And so I think, especially as fundraisers, we always ask ourselves, like, well, what do people really want? It's based on our instinct and experience, but we won't know until we actually ask or try it with donors. And so I think the ability to communicate in a broad sphere is so important, but I think nonprofits are going to be challenged to make it feel even more personal. So I'm speaking just to Jessica or just to Malou. and how can we do that in a creative and sustainable way? I think that is what we and nonprofits really need to be honing in on.
And can I just add that I think that's such a great point, and that looking, because you can look up like all these different A/B tests to do what works for a different nonprofit or a different company. You need to test it for yourself. So just so, because you're hearing someone say, oh, I tested this, I get newsletters all the time that be like, oh, we quick tested this for, this organization. That does not mean it'll work for your audience. So you really need to take those tests and do them for yourself, because every audience is so different and personalized.
Such great points. Thanks, Stef and Beth. All right, here's our next question. And Stef, I'll have you start us off with this one. What are some key metrics and analytic tools that nonprofits should prioritize to measure the success of their digital marketing campaigns?
Great question. It really depends on the goals of every nonprofit. Let's call it from a digital realm and perspective, but of course, website traffic. You want to be able to see where your donors, where your visitors are coming from. Your ROI, you want to make sure you're tracking spend, and that's a huge important when you're starting to spend on your digital advertising. You want to get conversion rates down on, where are people converting on your site? How are they converting? Engagement rate. So to get all of that, there's a lot of conflict. Google Analytics 4 is a new way to track everything that has, heard a lot of different opinions about, but us at Foresight, we are helping a lot of our nonprofits get set up on Google Analytics 4. And this might be a hot take, I kind of like it. It is a different way. You can't compare Google Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4, but Google Analytics 4, to me, you can get it to be more accurate. It's really event-based tracking that you can get all of this data that you want, and it's very personalized to the nonprofit. Where Universal Analytics, I think it was just something we were used to. It did a great job for what it did, but Google Analytics 4, and again, it's low barrier, it's free. So I do still think that is the king of analytic platforms to use. But getting your traffic down, I think, is one of the most important. Really seeing where your audience is coming from. That's the first key. And then as you're running ads, then you can get that conversion rate, that engagement rate, and then see what you're spending and what's working.
Thanks, Stef. All right, Shelley, over to you. What key metrics and tools should nonprofits focus on?
Yeah, just to add on to Stefa's recommendation is, if you're gonna go all in with G4, make sure you either have your IT department or a developer come in and set up e-commerce so you can see how it's paying off. I always have a lens on fundraising, so making sure you're seeing like which channels are bringing in the gifts, how much revenue is coming over, and that's kind of like an additional step to take with G4. It kind of applies to all channels. Like if you're running Facebook ads, you should have the pixel set up that gets your donations and revenue that comes over. You should have the API set up that brings it from the server side and the browser side. It's same with Google. You want to make sure you're quantifying all the donations that come in, and then those engines use their innate, very powerful targeting and bidding tools based on that data. You don't want to run a fundraising campaign if you can't use those results to optimize on fundraising, on purchases. It's so important. And I know it's like a missing link a lot of nonprofits have, because it's hard to find a good developer that can do this. But it is very important to make sure you have, the actual fundraising side set up to measure results.
Thanks, Shelley. All right, Beth, any advice on what metrics and tools to focus on?
Yes. So in the email marketing space, I think, there's all the goodies. There's open rate, which of course with Apple mail privacy protection is becoming unfortunately less and less reliable. There's click-through rate, which based on machine clicks, which sometimes what it means is some email servers are set up where it will automatically click on every link to check and make sure that it's secure before the person can actually click themselves. So that can be artificially increasing click-through rates. But I still think there's a lot of validity in the content or in the metrics and analytics we're getting from email marketing. And one of the things that we do often is we look at the folks who are clicking on different things in a fundraising email or an e-newsletter or some kind of communication, and then add intelligence behind who that person is. So if you know the 60 people who clicked through on your capital campaign to learn more about it, those are folks that actually could be targeted and followed up with because they've already shown and proven engagement. We've had success doing that to generate cold leads that have turned into warm prospects that have turned into 5-figure gifts. We've even seen that with planned giving content in e-newsletters, use that to generate $1 million estate planning gifts just based on an e-newsletter. But you don't know that data if you don't look at who is actually clicking on your emails and what they're clicking on. So I think there's so much data out there, and it's really hard to carve out time and energy to be able to do that. But it is critical not only to evaluating the success of this particular campaign, but it sets you up for what happens next and to become increasingly more and more data-driven in your decision-making, which I think is what we're all here to do, is to make smarter decisions based on the results of what we've done in the past.
Thanks, Beth. All right, Jessica, what would you like to add on metrics and tools?
Yeah, I think there's been a few things highlighted here that are really useful, and I think everybody's had really great suggestions. So what I want to do is kind of take a few of the things and like also explain sort of what's underpinning a lot of the recommendations we're making, just for any like maybe smaller nonprofits or people who are like brand new and they've been told, hey, figure out our marketing, but who may be less familiar with it. So I would agree with the idea that Steph shared that Google Analytics 4 is kind of the gold standard when it comes to analytics. And the reason like behind that, or sort of what underpins it, the thought process that I think probably all of us are going through, is that your website is the hub of your marketing activity, and Google Analytics will plug into your website and tell you about everything as it has to do with your website. What I see from a lot of very small nonprofits is they may not start with a website. They may start with a Facebook page, in which case your most important analytics are probably going to be your Facebook page. Now, that is not a strategy that is really going to be scalable at some point. If you are a growing organization, you are going to need a website. And at that point, I think it makes a lot of sense to transition over to GA4. But whatever you're using, or maybe even to pull Beth's example, maybe you have an email list and that's about it right now. There are like what's called native analytics built into just about every free platform you're going to use. That means analytics that live inside the platform that are available to you as the user, usually for free. So whatever platforms you're on, that's the best place to start. And if you do have a website, then you can really consolidate a lot of your reporting into GA4, and that's going to give you that much more holistic picture of what your marketing efforts look like. The other thing that I will provide a little bit of nuance on, because this is another thing that I see smaller organizations do. You do not have to check, for the very most part, your analytics every single day or multiple times a day. A lot of your data is a little too noisy, in all honesty, for it to be useful. So what I mean is like the difference between, we got 30 clicks today, we got 20 clicks yesterday, we got, 18 clicks last month, like those sorts of 1-day snapshots don't tell you a whole lot. What will tell you a whole lot is if you look at several weeks at a time. So we usually, for example, with our clients, yes, we are checking week to week and day to day, but we have experienced people who kind of know what the time frame is that they should expect to see changes on in our client accounts. If you are kind of new, it's beneficial to take monthly data. You compare it, hey, how does this compare to last month? And then ideally, as you get more data over time, how does this compare to the same time last year? Because it may also be that your organization is subject to some seasonal fluctuations. A great example would be if you work with schools in any capacity, you're going to have some peaks and then you're probably going to have a dip in the summer, and that's normal, not something to freak out about. So kind of just trying to add on to what's been said there with some of the context that I see with smaller organizations especially.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jessica. All right, Beth, here's our next question. How can nonprofits leverage storytelling and compelling content to enhance their digital marketing efforts?
I love this question. Storytelling it's everything, right? I mean, it's how we connect with donors. It's how we connect with our audience. And I think there's a couple of different ways that storytelling can be used. And I think in the digital sphere, as opposed to print or some other mechanisms, storytelling can be the written word. It can be a video. It can be an animated GIF. And I think there's opportunities to get really creative with showing in addition to telling. So sometimes that might mean, it could be a slide, a carousel of different images. It could be actually showing or monitoring the impact of a nonprofit. But I think ultimately telling the story to connect directly with the donors using you statements versus we statements, it's about creating that connection. So whether that's sharing the impact of your work or a story of a donor or someone else, I think from interviews, behind the scenes content, that's what everyone wants to really understand is what's actually happening behind the scenes, and how can I help your organization make a difference? So the way that there's a chance to pull back the curtain and just really share very honestly and transparently, I think that sometimes is a very unexpected way to connect with your donors, is to show them things that they might not have considered, or open their eyes or shine a spotlight on really the true impact of the organization. So lots of great ways to do that in the email space and on websites as well. But I'm curious to hear from some of our other folks here about your unique industries and the ways that you find creative storytelling to play a role.
Thanks, Beth. All right, Jessica, any tips on how to leverage storytelling and compelling content?
Yeah, I think a good way to be thinking about content for nonprofits, especially since, kind of famously the cliche goes, we're working on tight budgets with small teams, is to be thinking of what's that core story we want to tell, and then how can we tell that story in a way that's going to make it easy to repackage it into a couple of different formats. So if you take one slightly longer video, can you clip that into shorter videos that you could share on social? Can you, if you write one like blog post, let's say, can we clip that into shorter snippets that we can send out in email, that we can send out over social, that are going to kind of give us a little more bang for our buck and allow us to repurpose that content? As your organization matures, you're going to want to be thinking about each channel kind of as its own thing, but for organizations with limited time, that's a great place to start. And one recommendation that I would make, just kind of based on where I hang out, which is in the realm of Google, a lot of nonprofits that I encounter have really good ideas for content they want to share. They kind of know what their audiences are interested in seeing. They know everything about their mission. They're experts on their topic, but they don't always think strategically through how can we put out this content that we already have this great idea for, but how can we make it more likely that Google will pick it up? So I would really strongly recommend there's a lot of different free keyword tools you can use out there. Take some time, do a little research, find out what terms people are searching for, and then see if you can naturally, and that is the keyword naturally, incorporate those into your content in some of the places that are going to be relevant to Google. So like your title would be a big one. If there are links you're sharing, making sure that you're not just pasting a link, but that there's actual text that kind of explains what it's about, using it throughout your paragraphs. Places that are going to kind of signal to Google, hey, this is what that page is about, you will likely see better results over time in both your organic and then also in your paid ads. If you're taking that time to be a little thoughtful, do a half hour or so of keyword research and then kind of write it with hitting those keywords in mind.
Thanks for sharing, Jessica. All right, Stef, over to you. Any advice on how to leverage storytelling and compelling content?
Yeah, well, Jessica and Beth, those are such great perspectives. One, kind of taking the behind the curtain approach and then being really strategic. And I think there's an opportunity, and one of the great things about digital is you can kind of combine those. I think you definitely need to tell your story about the mission and what you're doing. I think video is the way to get people's attention right now, and to tell that story and to really create that emotional attachment to the nonprofit. And I think donors also are yearning for that transparency, like where is my money going, and showcasing the both. I think we're really used to seeing really good like teaser, videos and that are like highly produced. But I think what I'm seeing is the engagement with video that just looks like it's done on an iPhone, that's just kind of showing what's going on. And I think that has always been a surprise, that some of the best posts some of the nonprofits I've worked with have done were just ones that were quickly taken with your iPhone. And because that's actually real, like I think people undersee when a stock photo, when it's overly produced, there's like immediate, even if it's subliminal, like a disattachment with it. But when you see something that looks like, oh, someone was there and this is what my money's going to, I love it. So really thinking about being natural, again, genuine. But if you can, and I know there are times where, consent, you want to make sure you're doing everything correctly. But if you can take those behind the scene photos and showing your donors where their money is going, I think that's the story that they want to see.
Thanks, Steph. All right, Shelley, over to you. How can nonprofits leverage storytelling and compelling content?
All of those are great ideas. I will say years of testing storytelling, we always recommend we have great stories and we have authentic content to use, not like stock imagery per se or stories that somebody makes up, having actual authentic content, but always test it. Because I've seen with clients, we'll have this great story and a great picture, and then we'll test it against like a stats-based ad. And the stats-based ad will win. It just really depends on the campaign, the client, the offer. So just, I guess, always keep that in mind. Working with Humane, you always get, the poor sick dogs, and they make so much money. So in that case, they always win. But then with other nonprofits with missions or with environmental nonprofits, it may be the complete opposite. So stories are wonderful and they're what raises a lot of money. But we always want to test other ideas into the flow.
Thanks, Shelley. All right. This is the last of my questions before opening it up to our wonderful audience. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll get to them during the second half of the session. All right, Steph, I'll have you start us off our next question. What role does data privacy and ethical considerations play in nonprofit digital marketing, and how can organizations navigate these challenges?
Yes, this is a very on topic. So with data, I think my recommendation is to be as transparent as possible. I know there are laws that are for specific states that are a little more stringent, but I would say as long as you're being transparent and telling your donors what you're doing with data and following laws, like you might want to just follow California throughout all of your different, donors, wherever they're from, just to make sure that you're not treating any people differently anywhere. And you do want to make sure you're following best practices, even if, nonprofits aren't going to get the legal ramifications that organizations do. You should still follow those because your donors are trusting you with their money, and they're trusting you to be, fulfilling the reason why they're giving. And you want to prove that trust. And I think this is an easier way to build that trust with your donors, just being right away, be like, this is what we do with your data. This is why we are taking your data. If you don't want us to track, we will not track. And I think, and it is really important to get on board with this because it's becoming just the norm. Like, and if you're not doing it, I think donors will take pause and say, well, what are you doing with my data? Why aren't you asking me what, I think that's going to become more and more common. And they might go somewhere else. They might give to a different, what they would think was more secure.
Thanks, Steph. All right, Beth, how important is data and ethics in nonprofit digital marketing?
I think, Steph, I loved what you said about trust because, we've probably all seen the reports that fewer and fewer people are trusting charities, right? I think, and that's something that we grapple with. So what I would add to that, I think the transparency of here's what we're doing with your data is a huge element. I also think respecting their wishes and making sure that there is a path where if someone is saying, don't email me, don't contact me, or I want to be contacted in this way, not that way, making sure that you are respecting it. Not respecting those wishes is one of the quickest ways that you could lose a donor. We even see in the email space, if you've had it where you opt out and they're like, we will process this in 8 to 10 business days. That's not acceptable according to Can-Spam Act. It has to be an immediate opt out. And even, the donors responding back saying, my partner is deceased, please remove me from your list. Make sure that you have the methodology to quickly respond to that, put their wishes into place, and then respond back to them to build that relationship to say, this has been taken care of, thank you. So I think with that helps to build that bigger trust, not only in here's what we're gathering, but we're also going to be connecting with you and really respecting what you're giving us in terms of feedback of how you want to engage with us as an organization. So I think that's one way to really back up that ethical element of being a nonprofit.
Thanks, Beth. All right, Shelley, over to you. What role does data privacy and ethical considerations play in nonprofit digital marketing?
Yeah, I would say to add on to that, make sure your staff is walking the walk and they're actually doing those. Like, I can't tell you how many clients will email like a donor list to us. We're like, no, you got to put it on an FTP site. It's simple things like that where you're breaching the data and you don't even realize you're doing it because like it's a junior staff member or an intern or somebody who doesn't, know the details. So just making sure your staff is trained and they're aware of what you're promising your donors and that it's actually happening.
Such a great point. All right, Jessica, what would you like to add?
I mean, to be honest, anything I would add, I think is a little outside of this discussion. I feel like we've covered a lot of really good ground so far. I think the only thing, and it's sort of loosely related, but it does kind of tie into what Beth was talking about a little bit ago. Also, good data hygiene practices start in your CRM, like making sure that your own internal records are up to date is also really important because your internal records are likely going to guide how you are reaching out and how you're chatting with, existing supporters of your organization in whatever capacity that might be. And it might not be something as egregious as, let's say, like, hey, this person died and you keep asking them for a gift, but it could be something as simple as like, hey, this person had 2 kids who started college this year. They might not be in a position to give a lot this year, and maybe it would make sense to be a little bit more tactful and then kind of not think about that. So to add on to this, I would say keeping your CRM records up to date with notes about what's going on in people's lives to the best of your ability is also going to make your interactions with your supporters a lot smoother.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jessica. All right, the moment I'm sure many of you are waiting for, we're opening our Q&A portion, and we'll start off with a question here from Rebecca. And Shelley, I'll have you start us off with this question. What are some common downfalls or pitfalls you see nonprofits go through when advertising digitally?
Well, not having tracking available or set up, I know that's very much in the weeds, but sometimes just getting access to like the Google Tag Manager or to their website or to their donation platform. If you're advertising for a fundraising purpose and you don't have that side set up, you're limiting yourself on what like the results you can actually get. Obviously, having assets available if the agency is not doing the creative, if you're providing creative, we want to be able to work from something. Sometimes a website isn't as up to date as it could be, so you can't pull from that. So just having content and assets available for everyone to work with. And I think just being transparent about your goals and objectives for the program, because I know a lot of organizations are siloed. So our fundraising team is working with us to do one thing, but then the marketing team is kind of like, they're butting heads, and that's not easy for everyone. So I think just aligning all your silos, making sure everyone's in order on what they want for their goals and objectives, and it's kind of an agreement, and that it just helps for the campaigns to flow a lot more easily.
Thanks, Shelley. All right, Beth, any common mistakes you've seen nonprofits make?
Well, in the email space, we've talked about personalization, but you have to make sure the data is accurate. And that's one of the things we tell to our clients is if you don't feel confident that your salutation, your first name, your giving history is accurate, ignore it altogether. Only do it if you feel confident. I mean, even looking through your list, Jessica, to your point, it starts in your CRM. Are your donors' names in all caps or all lowercase? Are they correct? Keep those salutations up to date. One of the quickest ways that you can lose trust in your donors is providing the incorrect information. So I think making sure your database is accurate fundamentally, but also if you are feeding that information into some kind of dynamic content, whether it's online or offline, making sure that is 100% shipshape is really critical.
Thanks, Beth. All right, Steph, over to you. Any common mistakes you've seen nonprofits make?
I mean, and what I'm thinking, what came to mind when I thought of this is just double checking what you've set up, monitor your spend. If there's been so many times where I've seen nonprofits, they'll set up an ad campaign and they'll have it, they set it and kind of forget it, and they don't look back over a couple of weeks and they can't believe that they've gone through their spend, or they didn't want, like they misspelled something or something like that. Those little things, when you're looking at something day in, day out, you miss those things. So I always recommend give yourself a little bit of a calendar invite to yourself and double check your work, check it the day after, just to double check that everything is launched correctly. And then maybe put a week, double check your spend, make sure that it is spending correctly, double check how, your metrics are coming through. So that's a lot of things. I think some people are just like, okay, I did it. I did the thing. And then they don't look at it to make sure that it is working correctly and you are getting the data you want to be getting and you are spending, and don't go through your budget in 1 week.
Thanks, Steph. All right, Jessica, over to you. Any common mistakes you've seen?
A super common mistake that I see is nonprofits neglecting their website. As I kind of hinted at earlier, as you grow and mature as an organization, a lot of your marketing is going to shift back to your website kind of being that core backbone of your identity as an organization. And you could have the best digital ad campaign, you've targeted all the right keywords, that ad text is dialed in, and it can completely fall flat if people arrive at your website and they are greeted with like a mess, essentially. So I think for a lot of organizations who are wondering kind of where the most bang for their buck can be located, I think your website is a really strong candidate to take a look at, because it's going to fuel not just your organic, not just your paid Google ads. There's a good chance that on your social ads, you're probably sending folks back to your website in order to make a gift. A kind of caveat here as well would be like, if your donation pages are difficult to use and not user friendly, do not be surprised when people stop, in the process of making a gift and go, this is kind of too hard, I'll do it later. And then secretly they don't. I think that the neglecting the website is one of the most common mistakes I see. And I think there's definitely been organizations we've worked with over time who I've been thinking, oh man, we could go so far if you would update this website a little bit. So putting some time into that.
Thanks for sharing, Jessica. All right, here's our next question. And Beth, I'll have you start us off with this one. What are some benchmarks for nonprofits should be following?
So I saw a note in the chat in terms of, if we're looking at where do you look for benchmarks? Eloko mentioned M&R, which we really love for digital benchmarking. I think the Giving USA report, as well as the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, I really like for benchmarks to monitor. They update what's happening across the US on a quarterly basis. But in terms of specific benchmarks to be looking at, I think Jessica, it was you, but the importance of trends. If you look, for example, obviously we're in the email space, so I'll say that as an example, but a 40% open rate means nothing, but it means a lot if the open rate used to be 20%, now it's 40%, or if it was 80% and now it's 40%. So it's your trends for your organization, I think really does start to set that stage for engagement, conversions, all of those elements. There's so many different sizes of nonprofits, small, local, rural, regional, national. So in terms of benchmarking, I think there are some good standards out there, but I think it really depends on your unique organization. So no, that's not a super helpful answer. And maybe my colleagues have some other things to emphasize, but I truly believe that getting a baseline of what your normal is where you start, and then start to incrementally increase. Is it 5% growth, 10% growth, and that's what you're aiming for? And so monitoring on that absolute basis, here's how each individual email or campaign is performing is key, but then monitoring those trends on that monthly, quarterly, or annual basis. That really helps us set the stage for what's improving and what's changing, and what then, of course, can guide the direction for future success.
Thank you so much, Beth. All right, I'll open this up for the rest of the panelists. Anyone else want to add to that?
I think if you're working with an agency, a lot of times agencies will have internal benchmarks. They may not do a blog post about it or have press around it, but they have it like for their own purposes. And then if they're working like with a programmatic vendor or some other kind of partner, they will also have internal benchmarks. So you kind of have to ask for it to find it. I know like Blackbaud used to have the Luminate benchmarks that came out every year that had a lot of great email benchmarks. I don't think they have that specific anymore, but they have like kind of like a higher level Blackbaud one. And there's some other ones that are more like donor and like giving oriented, like on every channel, not just digital per se, but you really have to dig around to find the digital information in those.
I'd have to still, even with having that, I at least always look at those like, okay, but the grain of salt, because I think you gotta, your own information is your benchmark to be able to really see how that's going. Because that's a average. It's good to start off to get an idea by looking at all those benchmarks, but I think it's so important to make sure you're reporting on your data and really looking at it. I think that is the, like, not even looking at benchmarks, look at your data, regardless of the trends, the benchmarks for the industry. It's really about how are you doing, and are you incrementally getting better?
And if I can just jump in there too, Steph, yes, looking at the data, reporting on the data, but also reporting up and out the results of what's happening is important. So when I ask a lot of clients or folks, how often do you actually look at the results of your campaigns, any campaign, and do something with it? And I think we're so often on to the next one. And that makes sense with especially actually all nonprofits, right? Everyone's understaffed and has too much work to do. So as soon as you finish one thing, you're on to the next thing. But pausing to take that moment to look at how it what the feedback is, what the results are, but then sharing that with your team, with your board, with leadership, with whomever your stakeholders are, to help them understand the successes and then how that feeds into that next campaign. We shouldn't just be sitting on data. We should be sharing and spreading the love to everyone. But that's how we get our brains working to support and make us as more successful as organizations, by sharing that success and bringing other brains into the mix.
Thanks, everyone. All right, Jessica, I'll have you start us off with the next question. I know you spoke about smaller nonprofits earlier, but what do you feel is the most effective digital source for smaller nonprofits?
Yeah, I will fully show my bias here. I am a big search gal. So the value of search, here's what I will say. So there's pros and cons to search. And by search, I mean both like organic, which is to say when somebody types in a query into Google, those results you get that are not the advertising ones, those 10 blue links that we're used to seeing. That's what I mean when I say organic. Both organic and paid, that is an investment that I think will kind of yield a lot over time, and that is easy to scale with your organization. So it's worth it to begin building that when you're small. However, it kind of depends on what you are measuring, because if you are, let's say your core metric for success is donation sourced, that's it, that's all we care about, it's just donations, best source might actually be texting people, right? That's not a digital channel we've talked about a whole lot on this particular panel, but that might be way more effective, right? Similarly, if what you are interested in is kind of keeping people informed, then maybe an email is actually the better source for that. So I think, if I were to give you like the snappy answer, I think a lot of nonprofits should be investing more heavily in their website than they are today. However, the big like asterisk with that is it's really going to depend on what your most important mover is today. And so picking what to invest in based on kind of what is here today, what you need today, with a sight towards where are we trying to get to, how are we trying to show up, 5 years from now, that would kind of be how I would go about navigating that question.
Thanks, Jessica. Anyone else want to add to that? Otherwise, we'll move on to our next question. All right. The next question is, how should nonprofits be using AI? And can you give examples on how nonprofits you work with are using it? Shelley, I'll have you start us off with that.
Oh, give me the hard one. So I know the company I work for, we use AI for modeling, for direct mail acquisition lists. We're dipping our toe into it for digital like co-op list development. I know I spoke to earlier, you could also use it for some light content development. To Jessica's point, you don't want to, just copy and paste it and put it on your website without actually looking at it, because some, weird things will come up sometimes. And then within media and within Google, obviously the platforms work on AI to be able to optimize and bid efficiently. But like, I don't want people to shut down when they hear AI, because I think it's the wave of the future, but you just have to be able to, move into it slowly and with open eyes, and make sure that you don't, sometimes you'll work with somebody who just like gets scared of things like that and they'll stay away from it. But I think you have to go into it with open eyes and kind of embrace it. You don't have to like adopt it right away, but at least start testing it and thinking about ways you can use it to benefit your organization.
Thank you so much, Shelley. I'm so sorry for putting you on the spot there, but anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, as Shelley mentioned, it's a tool. It's another tool that helps you. It's not the end all be all of creating content. It's just another tool as any other tool that a marketer uses. That's how I am kind of going in and embracing it. And it really depends on the nonprofit how it's being used. I think it should be looked into and how can it expedite work. But again, it's just another tool or platform to kind of embrace rather than use completely.
Thanks, Steph. All right. And unbelievably, the hour has gone by so quickly. So we're going to wrap up this portion of the panel so we can stick to our schedule. And if you have more questions for our panelists, please complete the survey that will be dropped in the chat to indicate which panelists you have questions for. And we'll make sure to connect you with them after the session. I've had such a wonderful time hearing from our panelists today, and I'm hoping to get one final piece of insight from them all. And Beth, I'll have you start us off with this question. What do you see as the future of digital marketing for nonprofits, and how can nonprofits get ahead today?
I think honestly, a lot of the things that we talked about here fits the bill. Personalization, trying to segment and talk to your donors in the most unique possible way that you can through personalization, storytelling is critical. And then looking at the data, monitoring the data and using that information. If we don't pay attention to the success or failures of our previous campaigns, we'll never be able to learn and improve in the future. So I think making sure that at the end of every campaign, taking that moment to look and report and reflect, that will set us up for, I think, the greatest success in the future.
Thanks, Beth. All right, Jessica, over to you. What do you think of the future and how to get ahead today?
Yeah, I think that the ability to pivot and to think through what your audience is going to benefit from is a really tried and true marketing principle. I think it's really, especially as we sit here on kind of the cusp of what could be a work revolution or could flop as it relates to AI and some of these new tools that are coming out. I think the thing that does remain the same over time is there are always going to be new channels that are coming out. There are always going to be kind of new ways to appeal to different audiences. Different generations are always going to have kind of different sensibilities. So what you want to be thinking of is how can we remain flexible and how can we kind of continue to reach out to our audience in the way that they want to hear from us. So I think where I would start with that is take stock of what you're doing today. Be looking at sort of, okay, how are we reaching people today? And then that next question is, okay, what could we be doing to make this more impactful? And that'll kind of lead to a series of trial and error over time. Not everything you do is going to land, and that doesn't make it a complete failure or anything. But without testing, you have no way of knowing what will land. So start with where you are and be flexible and willing to test things out.
Thanks, Jessica. All right, Steph, thoughts on the future and how to get ahead today?
Yeah, I think digital channels are the future. And I think really investing time, I think time is something that is just probably one of the most important things in these new channels. Again, they are new. So investing time to review your analytics, investing time to train your team that they understand how to use it, and invest in testing what's working. So it's really about taking a step back and making sure that you're utilizing this technology to your advantage and understand that it is new and to give yourself some grace and time to embrace it.
Thanks, Steph. All right, Shelley, thoughts on the future and how to get ahead today?
Yeah, I think everything the ladies said makes sense. It's kind of what I was going to say, but I would say, yeah, continue testing. You always want to be testing new channels, new technology, new creative, embrace change. For those with a fundraising focus, you always got to look for ways to replace the boomers on your file, and your donors are aging out. You got to get those younger donors in the funnel. So make sure you're testing the social media channels that nobody wants to do, like TikTok and Snapchat, if nothing else for fundraising, but for like engaging them. So then when the time comes when they're ready to make a gift, you're the organization that's top of mind. You just want to make sure you have a presence kind of everywhere they're going. Even if they're not ready to donate, maybe they'll volunteer, maybe they'll participate in an event. You just want to make sure you're making an impression in their minds so that when they are ready to do so, you're right there front and center.
Such a great point. Thanks, Shelley. All right. And with that, we have reached the end of our panel. And I want to give a big thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights today. And I also want to give a big thank you to our audience. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope you enjoyed yourself and learned something that will benefit the work that you do on a daily basis. We have a packed few months of panels ahead of us, and I hope that you will join us for them. So keep an eye out on the NXT Unite community platform or in the NXT Unite LinkedIn page to make sure that you don't miss out on any of these. Better yet, go sign up for upcoming sessions now. It only takes one click to RSVP since you're already logged in. All right. Now, finally, I also would like to thank our sponsor for today's panel, Getting Attention. Thank you for your support on this free educational content. All right, that is it for me. It has been a pleasure speaking with you all. Thank you once again and have a nice rest of the day. Bye, everyone.